Hello guys, this is Panzermeister36. Today's video is going to be a little bit of a different video. We're going to be weathering an HO scale boxcar. Now it has been a long time since I've weathered one of these. A very long time. But I figured this would be a good fun project to get me back in the swing of things because I've been missing a little bit of mojo lately. So these are fun easy things to weather. You don't have to worry about painting, you just go right into weathering. So in this video we're going to look at making some chipping effects from where the door scrapes across the side. We'll look at some overall grease and grime on the sides, and we'll also focus especially grease and grime on the lower areas, including the trucks and the wheels. And of course we gotta always weather that fun boxcar roof there with some rust effects. That's always a fun bit. So if you're an HO scale or any scale railway guy, hopefully this video will be a little bit inspirational to you. So to begin, I guess I'll give you guys a little bit of an unboxing. This is a very nice rail car from X-Acto. I do love the patched scheme. I guess it was a X-Rail box, I'm not exactly too sure, but it's a very nice model. No mold points visible at all on the roof or anything. All the lettering's very crisp. You know, it's got all the details on the front and back, and it has the very nice stuff on the bottom too. It's beautiful. So I recommend going with a little bit more expensive model like this. It's only like 30 bucks, but it really complements the weathering. As always, we are going to start by removing the trucks because we're going to paint these separately. And I'm actually going to remove the wheels from the trucks because I'm going to paint those with a brush because they don't have any masks for those yet. And if you want to, you can even remove the couplers and paint those separately, but I don't really worry about that. So our first step in the weathering process is a 50-50 mix of XF72 and XF69 by Tamiya, thinned with lacquer thinner, about 60% lacquer thinner to 40% paint. And that gives us a nice dark brown gray color, which I use for painting tank tracks because they're also kind of like a dirty grimy color. And I use this for like I'm going to call this the road map. We're just going to lay out some general weathering on the bottom, you know, just grime and dust from the wheels and stuff on the tracks. So I'm making sure to catch all the inside edges there, anything you can see from a low angle at the side, and then I also build it up a little bit on the bottom, but we're going to work on this more later with some oil paints and stuff. This is just our kind of roadmap to lay out what we're going to work with later in more detail and precision. I also paint the trucks very briefly with this just to give them the same look so they're not just black. And there we go, pretty quick and easy, and that gives us a nice roadmap for what we're going to weather later. Now I'm going to give the model an oil wash. These are the first time of trying the 502 Abteilung oil paints. If you can't get any fancy modeling oil paints, the Winsor & Newton Winton brand of oil paint is the best non-modeling oil paint for modeling in my opinion. But if you can get a fancy brand like 502 Abteilung, MIG Ammo, or Wilder, those are pretty good. And also Wilder enamel thinner is what I'm going to be using to thin this down. So I mix up kind of like a sludgy mixture of 50-50 of the brown and the gray, basically smoke and bitumen, was the two oil colors I picked to give kind of the same color I use with the oil, with the initial airbrush, a dark brown grimy gray color. And then once it's been on there for like 5 minutes, I take a brush with a little bit of thinner on it, the same thinner I use to thin down the oil paint. I can kind of blend it out and smear it around so that it only remains in the crevices around the sides. If a little bit ends up on the flat panels, that's alright because you can just kind of turn it into some very subtle streaking effects. But really what I'm doing is I'm just kind of smearing in some oil paint into all the crevices and then just kind of blending it so it only really sticks in the areas I want. And this gives us some nice kind of fake shadow effects along with some grimy effects where it kind of collects in the corners. Now you want to use oil paints here, not acrylics, because acrylics will dry permanently and you won't be able to do this cleanup stage. They'll just stick on in a big mess. Oil paints have a long drying time, so you can really adjust them and move them around so that they're to your liking. Like I said, if you can't get a fancy modeling brand like 502 Abteilung, Wilder, or MIG Ammo, artist oil paints do work perfectly fine, I guess. They'll just have a little bit longer drying time, I would say, because they're not meant to work on plastic, they're more meant for a canvas. But they'll still work in the end if that's what you can get. So as you just saw, I applied a little bit to kind of make some greasy streaks around where the door slides open, because that seems like a reasonable location for some grease. And now I'm also blending it into the door here to make both shadow and grease effects. They're interchangeable, really, with such a dark color. As long as it looks good in the end, you know, you got good weathering. And I do clean up a little bit of excess there with a paper towel. Kind of ghetto, but it works. And don't just do this on the sides. You also got to get the top edges as well here, because those will have shadows and a little bit of grease in real life as well. So here's our completed pin wash or sludge wash of the model, whatever you want to call it. And as you can see, suddenly this has a very, very powerful effect. Now the tank, or it's not tank, freight car, suddenly looks very, very dirty. It's a very, very useful effect. Pretty easy, it only took me like half an hour. It's very, very powerful, and it just gives you the nice, quick and dirty overall kind of like grime streaking shadow effect. It's very, very powerful. So I set that to dry, and we're going to work on the wheels now. So the actual wheels, which are separated from the bogies, I'm going to paint with Tamiya XF68 NATO Brown, which is a nice kind of rusty brown red color. Now, you really should get a wheel mask so you can airbrush this. I don't have one, so I'm going to do it by hand, which is just kind of a waste of paint, but it's all I got. So you don't really want to spray the entire thing, because you want to leave the kind of like surfaces of the wheels that touch the rails bare metal. So that's why you want to get one of those masks, but since I don't, I just use a brush there. So I popped them in the bogies, which remember we already painted earlier with that color. And at this point I remounted them. And I did thin the Tamiya paint with a little bit of water when I was brushing it on. So now we're going to add some scrapes from where the door slides open across these ribs here. For those scrapes, I'm going to be using my favorite chipping color, which is Model Color 70822 German Camouflage Black Brown. This is like the perfect chipping color for anything. I use it for tanks a lot of the time, for like rusty red primer colors. It's going to work here perfectly the same way. So I'm using a small brush, kind of a bad brush, I should get a new one, but I'm basically just painting on some very, very fine chipping effects, mainly making them look like scrapes to emphasize where that door slides across these ribs here. And in areas where you have like a scrape, try to keep it at that same elevation across all of the ribs to make it look like, you know, there's a little bit of roughness to the door there, or the paint or something, so it's frequently rubbing across that area. I like the Model Color paints because if you mess up a little bit, you can kind of scrub it off with water in like 5 minutes, you know, before it's dried too much. And on the areas where it's been patched here, I made the chipping look a little bit lighter to emphasize that that's been a more recently repainted area. And there we go. Pretty easy, and that kind of just adds a nice worn effect without overdoing it with rust or anything like that. This is just some very, very simple scrapes there from where the door opens up. Adds a nice realistic effect to the freight car. Alright, last up we gotta paint the roof. Boxcar roofs are always fun. I already have a video all about this from a long time ago. I'm going to use 3 MIG pigments here. You can use any color of pigment or any brand of pigment really. I've got light rust, dark mud, and track brown. These are just varying degrees of rusty to brown kind of shades. And I have a bunch of old scruffy brushes because I don't really care about this precision wise too much. I begin by just applying some of the light rust color dry, and I'm just going to kind of make a random pattern. You might think that this is wasting pigment, but honestly, that's not very much pigment. I could probably do 30 or 40 boxcars with one of these little tubs. So now I move on to the mid-tone, and I just kind of work with the previous pattern and add a darker rusty effect to different areas of it. And then lastly, I pick the darkest color and do the same thing. You want this to be random. Don't think about it. Don't try to make like a pattern that's actually symmetrical or anything. You want it to be random. Now we're going to use the same Wilder enamel thinner I used previously to thin down the wash. And this is going to act as a temporary pigment fixer. This will hold the pigments on pretty well, but not super well. So we're going to do a varnish at the very end. But this works temporarily for our layering process. Also, I'm using this not like watered down white glue because it has super low surface tension, as you can see, so it really flows without moving the pigments around very much. Now I'm using a very, very large soft brush. I'm going to kind of stamp gently over this. Now this has just had the enamel thinner on there, so it's all still wet. And I'm just going to kind of mush the pigments in very, very gently. I don't want to smear them around. I just want to kind of vertically just kind of mush them and flatten them out a little bit. Just go back and forth. And then immediately afterwards, with the previous effect still wet, I now begin to dry blend more pigment on top. And it's just going to stick because the previous enamel thinner is still there. And then once again, we apply more enamel thinner on top of that. So it's like a layering process. First dry pigment, then fixer, or I guess enamel thinner, blend it, and then more dry pigment, and then more enamel thinner. And you can do as many layers as you want until you get a nice effect. So once that is dried, the enamel thinner is dried, I mixed up the same mixture of paint we did at the very, very beginning, that dark, grimy brown color. And I first of all did a couple of touch-ups in the bottom areas where I kind of worn it off with my hands a little bit. You can see one here just from handling. It got worn off. I guess the paint hadn't dried 100% because I worked too fast. So a couple of touch-ups there. Anything else that needs to be adjusted. I guess I also oversprayed the wheels a little bit, but that doesn't matter. They're not going to get gummed up, it's fine. Same thing with the couplers. And then I also did a little bit on the roof here as well. I focused mostly on kind of highlighting these ribs. You can see these exposed ribs here, just to make them look a little bit different from the rest of the rusty color. So there we go, our rusty roof is done, as well as the rest of our boxcar. Now we gotta seal it in, because it's gonna be handled because it's a model train. And usually for that I would use Tester's Dull Coat, which is a very, very good varnish. So it comes in a spray can, really, really nice, really, really matte. However, this time I tried something a little bit different. This time I actually tried Tamiya X21 flat base, which you actually airbrush on instead of using the can. Now I never used this before, and I thinned it with lacquer thinner, because lacquer thinner makes it a little bit more durable because it's a lacquer. And also sprays a little bit nicer as well. Yellow cap is lacquer. And it kind of gave me a weird effect because it wasn't completely opaque. It was a little bit transparent white, but that basically gave me a super subtle faded effect. So it's a happy accident. You can see that on the sides there and also on the roof as well. It kind of modeled the roof a little bit, like mottling. Very interesting. And the same thing on the sides. It looked a little bit faded. And there we go. Our boxcar is done. I keep almost saying tank. I'm so used to weathering tanks. But this was actually a very, very fun project. Kind of got me back into the mood for weathering, because I didn't have to worry about painting or building. It was super, super fun. And I'm very happy with the result here. I'm kind of pleasantly surprised that the Tamiya flat base did do that little bit of subtle fading effect, as you can see here. I wasn't expecting it, but I do like the results. That's something I'm going to remember for the future. If I ever want to subtly fade something, I can just airbrush on a couple of coats of that, and that has a really, really cool effect. I am very pleased with my rusty boxcar roof. This one looks great. Kind of end up with weird patterns in there, but I guess it's just the varnish kind of reactivating or moving the pigments around a little bit. All the layering we did, it kind of works well together, so you get that nice texture and patterning on there. Really, really cool. I think in the future I should probably get my chipping here a little bit more fine from the scrapes on the door. I also need to get a little more experience with weathering the ends of the boxcar because they're just kind of weird. I'm not sure how to weather those very well, but overall, very, very happy with it. Probably gonna do more weathering of rail cars soon, so stay tuned. But don't worry, this channel is gonna be still like 99% tanks, so don't worry too much about it. As always, thanks for watching very much. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Huge thanks to Patreon and PayPal supporters who give me a little bit of money every month, which helps me buying paints and products to test out. And as always, I will see you next time. Happy modeling, and goodbye.